Hi, welcome to my review of Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder, a film that follows the early life of Clark Kent, who is a man with extraordinary abilities.
You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders.
Man of Steel is directed by Zack Snyder, who, in my opinion, has had a very bumpy career to say the least. Zack Snyder has directed some good films like The Wiseman and the remake of George A. Romero's classic Dawn of the Dead, which might just be one of the very few remakes that I would consider good. However, he's also directed films that I thought were quite the very opposite. I know 300 has its fan base, but honestly, I don't really take a liking to the movie, and overall, I found it to be quite dull excluding the neat-looking visuals. Now, of course, Zack Snyder is also known for writing and directing a film that is widely considered to be among the worst films of 2011, and that film is Sucker Punch. It's a movie that looked as if it were written by a boy who had just begun to experience adolescence, and furthermore, it's a movie that made absolutely zero sense. It was slightly offensive, and above all, I saw it as a self-indulgent claptrap that didn't serve a purpose in the slightest. So when I found out that Christopher Nolan had picked Zack Snyder for Man of Steel, I was a little taken back by it. But even being a little surprised, I still had faith in Nolan's decision, and when I first saw the teaser back in July 2012, I became quite ecstatic. And right then and there, it became one of my most anticipated films of the year. So I'm going to get to the point, what is my opinion of Man of Steel? Well, for starters, I believe Man of Steel to be Zack Snyder's best film, which might seem like faint praise, but luckily, it's not quite. Man of Steel is one of my favorite movies this summer, and although I don't believe it to be the best, I find what Zack Snyder delivered here to be rocky, yet very admirable. With the exception of the last act, which I will get to in a minute, Man of Steel is surprisingly a fairly quiet film. Although a little melodramatic and cliche at times, the scenes with Clark Kent and his foster parents are really something beautiful. These scenes just seem to have a lot of heart that's just not seen in most comic book based movies. And to help aid in these great scenes is Hans Zimmer's soft and very sentimental score. To put it into context, it's like a blend between his Dark Knight and Inception scores, which is not exactly a bad thing at all. And another thing that's worth mentioning is the interesting camera work that bears a nice resemblance to the spiritualness of Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, which is something one would typically expect from a Zack Snyder film. However, despite all the positives I mentioned, when the movie reaches its third act is when everything gets cranked up to 11 and becomes nothing more than a loud, blurry, CGI-infested mess that's no different than the run-of-the-mill video game. And that's exactly what the third act looks like, a video game, and that same description could be applied to nearly all of Zack Snyder's films. It's like he just can't help himself, and unfortunately a great film such as this suffers because of it. Moving on to the performances, they range from good to not so much. For starters, Costner possibly gives the best performance in the film as Jonathan Kent, and as I mentioned earlier, the scenes with him and the variety of young actors who played Clark Kent were really good. And speaking of Clark Kent, Henry Cavill is exactly the Superman I imagined. He really does a great job at capturing the soul of Superman, and I hope to see him reprise his role in the rest of the series. Now there are some other good performances by Russel Crowe and Diane Lane, but I want to take this time to mention some of the performances I thought were a bit lacking. Although I wouldn't necessarily label him as bad, but Shannon, who plays General Zod, is okay in this, but if I had to pinpoint the source, I would say it just comes down to how his character was written. And unfortunately, the same can be said for the usually always fantastic Amy Adams, who plays Lois Lane. To sum it up, both of their characters just sort of screamed and yelled a lot. But the biggest problem I had performance-wise, and I'm probably gonna butcher this name, was Angie Trieu, who plays Feora. Although she was hardly in the film, she was very stale and seemed to be struggling with her lines. Overall, Man of Steel does have an abundance of problems, primarily in the last act, but when it gets something right, it gets it damn right. To sum it up, if it were not for the third act, I would have given Man of Steel a 4 out of 5. Unfortunately, as it stands, I'm going to give Man of Steel an enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5. It is worth checking out. I'm Colyn Kirkland, and thanks for watching.